All right, hello and welcome to the CommanDorks. I'm Beef.
I'm Tarren, and we're back for another Deck Tech double feature.
That's right, this will be our fourth cycle. Each cycle showcases two decks that we play and enjoy, and features a Deck Tech live stream gameplay and an eventual return to talk about how these decks continue to evolve.
And today I'll be bringing my Phenax mill deck with the express goal of destroying my opponent's libraries. And Beef is bringing Codie because, well, Codie is a book, and he does not appreciate library destroyers.
If you enjoy what you see here, be sure to like the video and subscribe, because we hope you'll be back for more dorky fun. But with that being said, let's dive right in. Today I'm going to be talking about my Codie Vociferous Codex deck. Codie Vociferous Codex is a 3-mana, all colorless. He's an artifact creature. He's a 1/4 with an activated ability, and he also has a static ability that says you can't cast permanent spells. His activated ability is a mana ability. It says pay 4 mana, tap, add Wooburg, and when you cast your next spell this turn, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile an instant or sorcery card with lesser mana value. Until end of turn, you may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Put each other card exiled this way on the bottom of your library in a random order. So it's kind of a pseudo cascade, but better, because I don't have to cast them right away. So, what's the pitch? Well, when I first built Codie, I should say, when I first pulled my copy of Codie, I took one look at it and I said, weird, I'm probably not going to be playing this guy. And then a couple of weeks later, Golos got banned, and suddenly Codie was looking a lot more interesting. So Golos Gates was turned into Codie Gate. But even then, I knew I didn't want to allow Codie's abilities, his built-in limitations, to stop me from doing some of the fun and ridiculous things that I wanted to do. And thus we have CLANG, which is an acronym for Codie Lands a New Gig. All right, so some key pieces to my Codie deck. We'll start off with a few that enable me to break Codie's one rule and put some permanents on the battlefield, even if Codie is already on the board. The three best examples of this are going to be Selvala Stampede, Genesis Storm, and Wargate. Now, Selvala Stampede is probably my favorite. It gives my opponents a chance to vote. Has Council's Dilemma, so it says starting with you, each player votes for wild or free. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card for each wild vote, and put those creature cards onto the battlefield. Then shuffle the rest into your library. You may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield for each free vote. So that's one great way of getting some creatures and some of my 5 artifacts. I have 10 creatures and 5 artifacts in the deck. Pretty high count for a commander that says you can't play permanent spells, but it's worth it in the long run. Genesis Storm works a similar way, only it's got the Commander Storm ability, so it says that it copies itself for each time that I've cast my commander earlier in the game, which is great. If I'm getting targeted and Codie is getting destroyed, it's going to get much more powerful the longer that happens. And then Wargate is another sorcery spell that lets me pay X mana after Bant and get a permanent directly from my library onto the battlefield. A few permanents that give me additional Codie activations per turn that I'll mention include Veyran, Voice of Duality, Kiora's Follower, and Manifold Key. Kiora and Manifold Key obviously untapping Codie and allowing me to tap him for a second activation, and Veyran just doubles the trigger. And then finally, a few pieces that allow me to manipulate the top of my library and set up ideal Codie triggers. And those I'll mention are Brainstorm, the instant speed, draw 3, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library, and then also Sensei's Divining Top and Scroll Rack. For the same reason, it's manipulating the top of my library and setting up the best possible freebies on Codie's activations. So how do we pilot this? Well, when I built Codie, I knew that I didn't want this deck to be a deck that only did one thing. Hyperlinear decks that don't introduce much variety tend to get pretty boring for me, so I knew I wanted this to have a few potential paths to victory, and let fate decide which route we're taking. So the three potential avenues are gates, threats, and burn. Gates is as straightforward as it gets. We're trying to get 9 gates, which are lands which normally enter the battlefield tapped, onto the battlefield, and then activate our Maze's End, which is also a land, for the win. Maze's End says that when you tap it and pay 3 mana and bounce it to your hand, you go search for a gate and put it onto the battlefield. And if at that time you control 10 or more gates with different names, you win the game. So, if we're going for the gates win, which is our primary win condition, then it's pretty straightforward because we're doing ramp things. We're doing things that are going to let us search for those gates. Codie lets me know if we take the fate side and let Codie choose. Codie sends me down that route by giving me things like circuitous route, explore the Underdark, open the way, or amulet of vigor. Those are clear signs that that's the best path for me to proceed, to get lots of lands on the board and to push for that victory. Threats. Well, as I've said, I didn't want this to be a Codie deck that was truly limited by his no permanence rule, so I knew that I wanted to have some friends for Codie. And Codie has 3 very big friends. These friends are Progenitus, Darksteel Colossus, and Worldspine Worm. So that's a 10 CMC, an 11 CMC, and another 11 CMC. Big creatures that all have unique and respective abilities. What unites them is the fact that if any of them are put in the discard in the graveyard from anywhere, they get shuffled back into your library. So they enable me to potentially reuse them and keep them threatening my opponents for the rest of the game. And they're great distractions when I'm doing things with racing for my gates as well, because it's hard to be concerned about the lands that I control if I've got a Progenitus on the board that's threatening lethal. So in rare occasions, these can be hard cast, but most often we're seeing them because we got lucky with Sylvala Stampede or Genesis Storm. These big fellas provide a great distraction and can knock the opponents out by themselves if that's the way that Codie wills it. And our third avenue is burn. What sort of burn are we talking about? Well, we have a few specific pieces that enable us to potentially burn out our opponents for the win. First and simplest is Gutter Snipe, burning each opponent for 2 damage every time we cast an instant or sorcery spell, and that adds up pretty quickly, considering that's the majority of our deck is instants and sorceries. Keen Duelist can fill a similar role, however its strength is really seen when we're manipulating the top of our library with tutors or scroll rack and the like to put specific cards on top, guaranteeing that our duel will be much more painful for our chosen opponent. The spells that support it also support this strategy include Blast of Genius, which is one of my favorites. I love discarding a Worldspine Worm to burn an opponent for 11, only for it to shuffle itself back into my library for later use. Calibrated Blast functions kind of like an instant speed Keen Duelist with flashback, especially if I've just done a tutor to put a big creature on top of my library. That's also pretty effective. And another fun one that I really just enjoy is Explosion of Riches. It's a 6-mana sorcery that says that you draw a card, and then each of your opponents may draw a card. And for each player who chooses to draw a card, 5 damage is done at random to one of my opponents. So, no matter what, that first one's not hitting me, and it's very fun to see my opponents all realize that, well, there's a very good chance they're going to get burned by this, so they might as well get a card out of it too and hope that it goes to someone else. Just good, kind of goofy chaos, but still satisfying burn. And it's a big spell for Codie, so it's great for getting 5, 4, 3 CMC spells off of a Codie activation as well. Backups, like the threats and burns, allow us to still have a chance, even if our Maze's End win condition gets exiled, and we can't go that route anymore. So, let's talk about some of the portions of our deck here. Obviously, one of the biggest parts of it for a Gates deck is going to be ramp. So what parts of our deck allow us to ramp? Well, we have a creature in Biomancer's Familiar, effectively is ramp, because he says that Codie's activated ability costs 2 less. So now it only costs me 2 mana to make Wooburg with Codie, so I can get my bigger spells out faster. Growth Spiral allows me to draw a card and then put an additional land on the battlefield. Recross the Paths is a spell that lets me reveal cards off the top of my library until I hit my next land. And then I also get to clash with an opponent, which means that we both reveal the top card. And if my card revealed has a higher CMC, then I get to put Recross the Paths back into my library, or back into my hand, excuse me. So I can keep reusing it and continue getting that advantage. I mentioned Wargate earlier. Half the time that I see Wargate, I'm hitting it off of a Codie activation, so when I cast it for 0, it's just getting me a land, but that's perfectly fine. That's what we want to be doing anyway. Pier's Whim is a great piece that can double as removal for problematic enchantments and artifacts. Tempt with Discovery is a classic, and a very dangerous bargain for my opponents to take. But it doesn't seem to stop them, so that's all right with me. Circuitous Route is obviously a must-have in the Gates deck. It's going to let me search up 2 gates and put them on the battlefield. Explore the Underdark is much the same. For 1 more mana, it does the same thing as Circuitous Route, plus it lets you venture into the dungeon, I believe is how it... into the Underdark, yes. Essentially, it's going to get me a basic land, because it's my only card like that. Urban Evolution lets me draw 3 cards and put an additional land on the battlefield. And finally, Open the Way is a 2 green and X. You can pay X up to 4, which X is can be no higher than the number of players in the game, and that includes yourself. But it does similar to Recross the Paths in that it then reveals X off the top of your library until you reveal X lands and puts them on the battlefield. So another great ramp piece that can be really quick at getting my gates on the board. But that's 10 pieces of ramp right there, and they are all very effective pieces. If we get into card draw, Codie runs a lot of tutor and recursion effects that get additional cards into hand, but as strict card draw, a few of those would include, obviously I mentioned Brainstorm is great for the top deck. Keen Duelist is putting an additional card in my hand every single turn that it's on the battlefield. And I also play Fibblethip the Lost for the memes, because it's just too funny to surprise that you might deal with the Progenitus, and you might just get to see Fibblethip, and I love that kind of chaotic fun. Codie's friends aren't all big scary monsters; some of them are just little guys. And then, of course, Blast of Genius I mentioned earlier for the burn. It draws you 3 cards, and then you discard. So it's a great piece. Some tutors to hand that I run include Profane Tutor, is obviously one of the most popular tutors in a Codie deck, because if I cast a 1-mana spell with a Codie activation, the only spell that's costing less in my deck is Profane Tutor. So I can get a free tutor of anything to my hand off that. It's very good. Sylvan Scrying is a 2-mana tutor for any land, which is also pretty useful in a Gates deck. Solve the Equation is a tutor for any instant or sorcery. And Signal of Clans is a roundabout creature tutor. But as I've established, there's good reasons to want specific creatures in my hands at different times in the game. Let's move on to removal. I've got 8 pieces that I've designated as removal here. Dismantling Wave is a great way to remove a artifact or enchantment on each of my opponent's battlefields. Or if I want to cycle it for 8 mana, I can destroy all artifacts and enchantments. So situationally very useful to have that around. Wrong Turn is one of my favorite pieces of removal for Codie, specifically because it features artwork of a library. And I really enjoy it because sometimes it can be very funny to give my opponent Codie and stop them from casting any more permanents. Because I'm prepared for that. They're not. Delayed Blast Fireball is one of my favorite removal pieces that's come out in the last few years. And with Codie, it's even better because if I hit that with a Codie activation, I can cast it from exile without paying its mana cost, and I get the upgraded version because it's cast from exile, despite not being foretold. So that's a great one, and it's a one-sided potential board wipe. I love that. Pier's Whim, as I mentioned, is ramp and removal. Another piece that's great is Turn and Burn. It's targeted removal at 5 CMC, or situationally, sometimes I just want to turn Codie off so that I can just cast my Soul Ring from my hand. Or I want to drop a small creature and just turn him into it removes his abilities for the turn effectively, and then I can burn something else. But that's just a nice little additional benefit of running Turn and Burn. I'm also running Aether Gale, which is a 5-mana pseudo board wipe, but it's letting me bounce 6 permanents from battlefield to their owner's hands. Terminus is a really great removal piece because it's not exiling, it's not board wiping, it's just putting everything back into their opponent, into their libraries, all the creatures. And it also plays nicely with top deck manipulation, considering that it has a miracle cost as well. And finally, the last piece of major removal is Volcanic Vision. It doubles as recursion and a one-sided board wipe, because it lets me return an instant or sorcery from my graveyard and then deal damage equal to its CMC to each creature my opponents control. A little bit more recursion. This is a fun piece, Pull from Eternity. When I hit it with Codie, I would say half the time it's a miss, and it's just going to get exiled and lost. And that's still worth it to me, because the games where it's relevant, it can enable some really explosive plays. I should mention, Pull from Eternity lets you return any card from exile to your graveyard. And I have some spells that exile themselves, and there are times when I would really love to be able to recast some of those. And this is the kind of deck that can pull that off. So, Pull from Eternity is in here. I also run Regrowth, which is simple and timeless. It's 2 mana and it returns any card from your graveyard to your hand. Bala Ged is a little less simple but more flexible, and it does the same thing for 3 mana. But it also has the added benefit of being a tapped green land in the back if I want to play it for its backside instead. Sabin's Reclamation is great for getting an important land, say a Maze's End, back from my graveyard, or recurring an important artifact or creature, or Codie, because he's also 3 CMC. I'm running Healing Technique, which is kind of fun for political reasons. I can demonstrate it and allow someone else to get a piece back from their graveyard, but it equals double recursion for me and some life gain. I also run Past in Flames, which gives all of my instant and sorcery spells flashback in my graveyard. One more creature that does the same thing is Lier, Disciple of the Drowned, gives my cards all flashback, and it also has the added benefit of saying that nothing can be countered, which is great, because this is not really a counterspell deck, so I would prefer that you let Codie do his thing. Thanks. Spell Twine is a great piece of recursion and spell casting, so I can get the best possible option out of my graveyard and the best possible option out of an opponent's graveyard, and then cast them both. I mentioned Volcanic Vision for its board wipe inclusion, and Mnemonic Deluge is also essentially recursion, but it's letting me cast something from the graveyard 3 times. And with the right selection, that's a game winner. Protection pieces. This is probably the weakest position because Codie he's more proactive than reactive. But we have a few pieces that can allow us to have a little bit of control or protection on our opponent's turns, and those include Narset's Reversal. Reverberate can, in a pinch, double as a counterspell. Simic Charm is a great piece for bouncing specific things in the pinch, or giving my permanents hexproof, which is also great. And I also run Teferi's Time Twist. This is kind of another double one. It exiles a permanent from your board until your end step, and when it comes back in, if it was a creature, it has a +1/+1 counter on it. So it's another great piece for saving Codie from a piece of targeted removal or a board wipe, and also doubling as an option for, again, getting Codie off the board long enough for me to cast a permanent or a creature or Lier or whatever the case may be without having to deal with that no permanence rule. Some utility pieces. The cards I decided to go with here and just mention were Personal Tutor. Lets me go get a sorcery and put that on top of my library. Obviously, choosing an instant or sorcery and putting that on top of my library sets up the best possible situations for Codie activations. Mystical Tutor works the same way, only it's an instant and it lets you get instants and sorceries. Increasing Vengeance is another copy spell, which is great to hit off of Codie. Fury Storm is another copy that has the same Commander Storm ability that gets additional copies on it for each time you've cast your commander so far this game, and that's another card that has really had some great moments to shine in this deck. And finally, I'm also running Temporal Mastery. I very quickly decided while building this that I was only going to run one extra turn spell because one is more than enough. And I don't want to be playing a deck that's miserable for my opponents to sit through. And even with just one that can exile itself, I still find ways to do terrible, dirty things with that. And I'm just fine with a very limited and narrow avenue for doing those terrible things.
That's fair. Thank you for that.
You gotta have a little bit of self-control, recognize who you are in the pod, and I want my friends to have a fun time. So let's see, what else can we talk about here? The mana base, that's probably the most straightforward. We're running, if you include Bala Ged Recovery with that MDFC, that's 38 total lands, 18 of which are gates, 10 of the original guild gates, 5 of the new choose a color when they ETB gates. I'm also running Gond Gate, of course, which lets all my gates enter untapped. Some multi-purpose pieces that I haven't mentioned so far. Noxious Revival is recursion, but it's also setting up perfect Codie activations. It's a Phyrexian green mana, so you can pay 2 life or green to return target card from your graveyard to the top of your library, and it's an instant speed spell. So without any mana, at instant speed, get the best thing out of there, put it on top of your library, and if you do that right before a Codie activation, you can set up some truly powerful moments. Another piece that I'm including in multi-purpose here would be Irenicus's Vile Duplication. Most of the time I'm just using it, I'm going to use it to copy Codie and get an additional Codie trigger each time I cast a spell. But the thing I like about it too is that it ties back to the removal piece, wrong turn. If I've got 2 of them, then it's even more tempting to give one away and make somebody sad. Some synergy. This is really not a combo deck. It's combinations of things that do things and get a lot of value, but I'm not really trying to activate any specific infinite combos. But one synergistic piece that I'll mention is, as I mentioned, this is a lands deck. Codie lands a new gig. And one of the lands that can keep him alive long enough to win with the gates is going to be Glacial Chasm. It's a great land that when it enters, you have to sacrifice a land, and then on your upkeep, you put a counter on it. You lose 2 life for each counter on Glacial Chasm. And if you choose not to do that, you can sacrifice it and it goes to your graveyard. But it's essentially its ability says that you take no damage. So it's a great way to just stay alive and keep on trucking until you get those gates out. And I can't tell you how many times it's saved my bacon. I don't know that it's going to save me against milling, though, so that's going to be the tricky part. We'll see how I deal with that. Weaknesses and challenges, I did mention the deck is very proactive, so it struggles with reacting to active threats or dealing with problems when it's not my turn. But that's part of what makes it fun, and I can't wait to show it to you. It's one of my favorite decks.
All right, so moving on to the mill deck. So Halloween is over, harvest is done, and after countless hours of farmers toiling their land and days upon days of commander deck brewers fine-tuning their favorite commander deck, it's time to send all those bushels of grain and all those decks to the mill. You see, it all began in 1994 with the release of the second Magic the Gathering set, Antiquities. That set introduced a particular card called Millstone. Millstone is a 2-cost artifact that allows you to pay 2 and tap it to put the top 2 cards of target player's library into their graveyard. Some might say it was all downhill from there, or dare I say, down into the graveyard. However, Millstone was but only one of several cards printed over the years, enabling an opponent to lose the game via the decking rule. We have seen other iterations of this in Grindstone and Whetstone. Later on, we'd see mill effects more often on instants and sorceries, such as Traumatize from the Odyssey set, or Glimpse the Unthinkable from Ravnica City of Guilds. Most mill cards tend to depict imparting some form of mental trauma or insanity onto your opponent, or even drowning them. Several other mill staples would follow in the coming years, signaling Wizards' encouragement of utilizing this strategy to win games. But the true innovation that turbocharged the mill strategy was the introduction of Bruvok the Grandiloquent in the original Jumpstart set. With Bruvok in the mix, every mill effect became twice as infuriating for opponents. And finally, we arrive at the year 2020, where at last, Wizards incorporated the keyword mill into the game, after most players had already been using it for damn near 30 years at that point. So, here I am with nothing but mill. That's a but with 2 T's. Because when you play mill, everyone thinks you're an ass. I don't know. I guess there's something about taking away people's libraries that makes you a natural target. So, despite the fact that there's more cards to mill than damage to deal. So, you know, I guess I leaned into that idea a little bit, and I have a deck full of high toughness, big butt creatures. So, alright. So, yeah, the commander here is Phenax, God of Deception. He is 3 blue and black, 4 power, 7 toughness, legendary enchantment creature god. That's a mouthful. Indestructible, which is nice, but as long as your devotion to blue and black is less than 7, Phenax isn't a creature. But he has an ability that says, creatures you control have tap them. Target player mills X cards where X is this creature's toughness. So, the general game plan is to quickly build a line of high toughness blockers that hopefully keep me alive long enough where I can mill my opponents out equal to those creatures' toughness. But due to the rather prolonged nature of this process, you know, milling 276 cards versus dealing 120 damage, I have a handful of mill-related combos that can also clinch victory pretty quickly. So, speaking of those combos, moving into key pieces. So, I've got about 8 or so that I would call out as a key piece because they play into combos mostly. Like I talked about a little bit ago, Bruvok is probably one of, if not the best key piece, because he just turbocharges all of the mill engine, if you will, by doubling all the cards milled. Him combined with Maddening Cacophony can instantly win me the game, or paired with Traumatize can take out a single opponent. Otherwise, Duskmantle Guildmage's first activated ability combos with those Millhalf library spells and can otherwise go infinite with Mind Crank or Blood Chief Ascension, assuming that has the 3 quest counters on it. Intruder Alarm is potentially insane, as I can respond to each trigger to untap all creatures by tapping my own to mill, thus letting them be untapped by it for more mill. Mind Grind is a potential late game mill engine. If I could just dump, I shouldn't say engine, but if I can dump all my mana into that, it can lead into some pretty a lot of cards milled. Probably though the dirtiest bunch of these combos is Eater of the Dead, which combos near infinite, not quite, but near infinite with Phenax. As long as I'm able to keep milling a creature into the graveyard by tapping him to mill equal to his toughness, I can keep untapping him if I have a creature to exile with his ability. So as long as I keep milling a creature, I'm going to hopefully mill my opponents out. But if I'm going against a spellsling deck like Beef's running, that's probably going to put that on a little bit of a hold. It's going to be more difficult to pull that off. But oh yeah, one other thing. I played a game recently where I discovered that Eater of the Dead is very difficult to interact with because his ability is just a 0 cost to activate. So let's say I activate him to exile a creature in an opponent's graveyard. They respond by, I don't know, wanting to remove their own creature. I can just activate it again in response and target that same creature because it's still around and their spell hasn't resolved yet. So I can just keep throwing activations on the stack and do my thing until I'm have no more creatures to exile. So yeah, it's kind of busted. Synergies and combos. So I've got a handful. I've got Ruin Crab or Altar of the Brood, which pair pretty nicely with fetch lands or token generators in the case of Altar of the Brood. Consecrated Sphinx and or other draw engines go really nicely with Psychic Corrosion. Spell Crumple and Hinder are both subpar counterspells in most cases, but when they are paired with the spell Tunnel Vision, are really, really nice and kind of dirty. Minamo, School at Water's Edge, plus any legendary creature like Bruvak, Charix, King Makar, all play in pretty well because some of those have abilities that happen when they either tap or untap. And then finally, Cabal Coffers and or Crypt Ghast or into Mind Grind. So basically ways to just generate a ton of mana into a Mind Grind. Going into ramp, I've got about 10 pieces. So I have like kind of your usual mana rocks, Arcane Signet, Dimir Signet, Soul Ring, Talisman of Dominance, Thought Vessel. But I do have a few others in Ancient Tomb, Crypt Ghast. I have Realm Breaker, the Invasion Tree. I wasn't quite sure about this one at the start, but in the recent game that I played, it actually did a lot of work for me because, people are playing fetch lands. There's more than likely going to be lands and graveyards at a certain point. And I've got Scare Tiller as well. Potentially can recur one of my own fetch lands or other land, or just put a land from my hand onto the battlefield when I tap him with Phenax, excuse me. And Cabal Coffers as well is just a good ramp engine if I have enough swamps or have Urborg in play. We'll move into card draw. So I've got a lot of card draw pieces in here. I've split them into kind of 3 sections, the smallest of which is the tutor section. So I've got Expedition Map in the deck, mostly to try and grab Urborg, or if I have Urborg already, I want to get Cabal Coffers. It's just a way to try and get that combination going. And then I also have Scheming Symmetry, which is choose 2 target players. Each of them searches their library for a card and then shuffles their library and puts that card on top. Well, I don't mind letting my opponent put something on top of their library because I'm just gonna mill it away. So yeah, it's I think a natural inclusion in this deck. Other card, so I have the next section listed as immediate draw, so like spells that just immediately put cards in my hand, for the most part. Court of Cunning is going to guarantee at least 1 card draw with giving myself the Monarch, but if I manage to keep the Monarch, whoo, that's a lot of mill on each upkeep trigger. Drown in Dreams is mill and draw. If my commander's in play, it is. Fractured Sanity it's great if I can cast it for the 3 to mill each opponent the 13, but it has that cycling ability which still mills a little bit and will draw me a card. So, and Into the Story is just a great payoff draw spell for 4. It costs 3 less if an opponent has 7 or more cards in the graveyard, it costs 3 less. So for 4, I draw 4 at instant speed too. So that's pretty nice. Visions of Beyond is similar to that, but has a higher requirement of cards in graveyard. That wants to see 20 cards in an opponent's graveyard, but it's one blue to let me draw 3 at instant speed. So, And then we have the last section that I've called kind of the high ceiling draw, where, you know, it's usually a higher cost to cast the thing, but it has a much higher ceiling. So these are things like Consecrated Sphinx, which is just a high toughness flyer aside from the draw effect on it. Endbringer is kind of tricky to cast at times because of the colorless mana required, but the fact that it's going to untap itself at the start of each opponent's turn is just great, because I can, you know, as a default, I can just use that to keep milling, or if I have the colorless mana available, I can draw a card. So it's just a nice one to have in there for that reason. Seagate Restoration, you know, when it's not a land, it's a late game, just draw everything you need. And then Sire of Stagnation. I haven't, you know, of all the times I've played this deck, I don't think I've ever gotten this guy out, but I could see where it'd be really, really good, especially against like a land-focused deck, because whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, that player exiles the top 2 cards of their library, and I draw 2 cards. So it's just whittling down their library every so much and just filling my hand with cards. And then a new inclusion, a brand new card from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, the Ancient One, which is just a 2 mana, blue and a black, for an 8/8 body that has Descend 8, so he can't attack or block unless there's 8 or more permanent cards in my graveyard. But I don't care. I just wanted you tap him to mill, so it's perfect. And I can pay 4 to draw a card and discard a card. And when I discard a card in this way, target player mills cards equal to that card's mana value. So, you know, if I get him out early game and I have 4 mana and I really want to draw a card and I have, say, you know, a Consecrated Sphinx that I just don't think I'm going to get to play soon, I could discard it and mill somebody 6. So, not bad. Or maybe recur that later on. So those are all of my draw effects. There were like 15 of those total, roughly. Multi-purpose cards, so things that typically will, you know, either remove and ramp or draw and ramp. So I've got Arcane Denial, which is kind of a remove and draw. Lets my opponent draw 2 as well, but hey, I'm fine with that in most cases. Black Market Connections is just your typical ramp and draw. Better Phyrexian Arena. Cryptic Command is really good when you're able to run or have a lot of blue reliably. Typically, it's going to be a remove and draw, but can also save myself by tapping out my opponent's creatures. King Makar the Gold Cursed is really good in this deck. With Phenax in play, he's able to reliably keep tapping himself, and whenever he untaps, he's going to exile target creature and give me a gold token. So, yeah, he's actually really, really good in the deck. Mana Drain is your, you know, removal and ramp on my next upkeep, and that's colorless mana that could be used for, say, Endbringer. And then finally, I've got Shieldred, the newest one that has the backside of the Saga, which basically is just a solid sacrifice removal, but it's also recursion, also a little bit of mill and discard. Potential win con too, if I recur enough of everybody's creatures, depending on what I get, could help me win the game. So it's nice. Plus the requirement for transforming her requires cards in opponent's graveyard, so I thought it was a natural fit in here. Removal. I've got about 10 or so removal spells. I've split these into about 3 sections as well, because one of them I've dubbed as Graveyard Lock. So when you're putting tons of cards in opponents' graveyards anymore, a lot of decks, you're just giving them fuel for their fire, right? So I don't want that to happen. I want them to look at those cards and cry when they can't use them. So I've got Grafdigger's Cage, which says creature cards in graveyards and libraries can't enter the battlefield. God, I just realized that's going to stop some of the Codie shenanigans, potentially. Silent Gravestone. Cards in graveyards can't be the target of spells or abilities. And then Soulless Jailer says permanent cards in graveyards can't enter the battlefield. And players can't cast non-creature spells from graveyards or exile. So just three ways to try and just prevent my opponents mostly from touching things that go in the graveyard. And then I've got kind of your more traditional removal. Drown in the Lock is probably the star among them because it just synergizes with the mill strategy. It's either a counter spell or a spot remove. Just, oh, it's perfect. Hagra Mauling is you know, a little higher cost that I would like to see for a spot remove, but the fact that it could also be a tapped black land is pretty good. Odawara, Soaring City, functions, you know, as a bounce effect if I need it to be. And I talked about Hinder and Spell Crumple earlier. They're not the best counterspells in their own right, but with the certain card in the deck, it can be potentially really good. And then I have a couple board wipes in Cyclonic Rift. Yeah, I know. And then Toxic Deluge, which is really good because I can, you can choose what the amount is going to be. So I can try to get the most optimal -X/-X, so my high toughness creatures ideally survive when most of my opponents go away. So that's the idea, at least. Recursion. I've got 5 recursion pieces. Command Beacon is good because my commander, I mean, it does have Indestructible, which is nice, so it kind of protects itself in a way. But if it does get removed through exile or something, being able to just get it into my hand with Command Beacon can be good. Because I really want Phenax out there. Mystic Sanctuary in kind of the late game is really good because if it's able to enter untapped, if I have enough islands, it'll return an instant or sorcery from graveyard to hand, which could be something like Traumatize or Maddening Cacophony. Takenuma, Abandoned Mire, can potentially help me recur a creature. Sheoldred, I talked about earlier. Get all creatures from all graveyards if that last saga step, if it gets to that. And then Scare Tiller can recur lands in my graveyard. All right, protection pieces. The only card that I have considered, aside from the counter spells, which you could argue function as protection if they need to, but the one piece that stands alone as that is Silent Arbiter, which says no more than one creature can attack each combat, and no more than one creature can block each combat, which is perfect for me because I don't want people just swinging all out at me because because I'm the mill deck, and it makes people gets them a little spicy. I don't know, makes them angry. Okay. And then utility pieces. So I've got I've got Castle Vantris, which can be good if I'm holding up mana, lets me scry before my next draw. Nephalia Drownyard is just a mill effect on a land that it's not my, go-to by any means, but if I need to hold up mana and I have nothing else to do with it before my turn, it's a good way to mill a little bit more. Crashing Drawbridge and Thousand Year Elixir allow me to be able to tap with my creatures right away with their mill effects. Okay, the biggest section I've just called mill because that's the main thing we're doing. So I've split these into a few categories too. The high toughness category. So I've got Charix, the Raging Isle. He's like the highest toughness creature in the game, I think? Question mark? I'm pretty sure that's still the case. Consuming Aberration can be just insane. I had originally included Rogue's Passage in the deck because you could just give him unblockable and swing through, but then I thought, well, if he's already that high of toughness, why don't I just go for the mill win anyway, just tap on the mill. I don't know. Maybe I should include the Rogue's Passage again. We'll see. Haunt of the High Tower was a more recent inclusion because I needed more flying blockers. Plus, he's kind of another consuming aberration. He needs to see the mill happen, but he's got flying and lifelink. And when he attacks, an opponent discards a card. So he's really, really good. Hope can potentially help me stay alive with the lifelink. Hover Barrier, another just high toughness flying blocker. Jace's Phantasm turns online with 10 cards in opponent's graveyard. So then he's a 5/5 flyer for 1. Shield Sphere is the newer one I discovered that I really like. It is a 0-drop wall, 0/6, that says if it is assigned as a blocker, put a -0/-1 counter on it. I never knew that there was a -0/-1 counter, but this card has it. But yeah, it's just a way to get a really early blocker out there. And I can respond to the trigger from assigning it as a blocker, so I can still get the higher mill out of it. The Tree of Perdition, kind of a natural inclusion in the deck, because if I manage to swap the toughness with an opponent's life total, then I'm milling that much instead. So, and Weathered Sentinels is also pretty good because it's got reach, and when it attacks, it buffs itself, so I can, and it has vigilance too, so I can, if an opponent attacked me before, I can attack with it, it buffs itself, and then I tap it after it's attacked. So all right, so that was the high toughness creature section, and then the spell mill section. So Archive Trap is really good. You know, I think almost every game that I manage to draw into it, I'm able to cast it for 0, because people are searching their libraries all the time. Tasha's Hideous Laughter, it depends on an opponent's decks, but if they have a ton of lands or really low CMC spells, it can do a lot of work, because it mills, well, doesn't even mill, it's exiles until they exile cards with total mana value 20. So yeah, it's kind of a wild card, but it can do some work. Let's see. And then I mentioned Tunnel Vision before. Name a card, target player mills until they find that card. And if I know it's on the bottom of their library, well, GG. Okay, and then I have kind of the miscellaneous or other Altar of the Brood. I mentioned before, whenever a permanent enters, each opponent is milling 1. Memory Erosion is annoying for my opponents, because whenever an opponent casts a spell, they're gonna mill 2. Psychic Corrosion is whenever I draw a card, each opponent's going to mill 2 cards. So, with all the draw engines I mentioned before, can be pretty good. Riddle Keeper is a good deterrent from people attacking me too often, or Planeswalker I control. I have one Planeswalker in the deck, which is Jace Memory Adept, because he has that 0 activation to mill everybody 10. Or not everybody, an opponent 10. And then finally, Ruin Crab. The little crab that everybody loves to hate. Perfect turn 1 play, though. And then finally, we'll get into the mana base. Nothing too crazy here. I mentioned before, I run a handful of fetch lands just because of the Ruin Crab in the deck, but it also pairs well with the Altar of the Brood, and pairs well with the Ancient One, because that card cares about permanent cards in my graveyard. So getting lands in there ASAP is good too. And then Reliquary Tower I've included because there's the potential to draw a lot of cards, and I want to make sure I'm holding on to them. And Urborg turns other cards online much better. All right, piloting. So despite giving myself the handicap of having to remove more overall cards from libraries than life totals, turns out people really hate being milled. So it's important I try to build up a solid line of blockers before really unleashing the mill engine. But on the same coin, I really want to get Phenax in play as soon as possible, so I have that ability to start tapping them for the mill. But also holding up counterspell mana can be important to keep my board state alive and ensure I'm able to keep milling my opponents over time. As much as I like the idea of milling via traditional mill, if I have a combo piece or combo I'm able to pull off, I just got to go for it, especially if there's like some aggressive decks out there that are just chipping away life totals. Sometimes it's just the way the deck has to try and win. Weaknesses and challenges. So I've hammered this point pretty hard, but I have the minimum of about 276 cards I'm trying to mill from opponents' libraries. Probably, less than that as the game goes on, obviously, but still, this deck needs to last several turns in order to achieve that. If I don't have any of my graveyard lock pieces in play, there are certain matchups that can be pretty difficult, such as Carador, Nethroi, Windgrace, Riel, Kess, Slimefoot and Squee, and the Beamtown Bullies, just to name a few commanders that really like it when cards get milled into their graveyard. In those cases, I have to be extra careful about when I decide to mill those decks, or try to take them out through some other different means, or make a friend at the table. Gaia's Blessing is very sad to see being milled in an opponent's deck, because that's just going to shuffle everything back into their library, and other effects that do that too, like Elixir of Immortality, ways to just recycle your cards can put a sad face on the mill deck. There are other cards like Progenitus and certain Eldrazi that will shuffle themselves back in if they get milled, but Yeah, that is the mill deck. That is Phenax, God of Deception. So, huzzah.
I'm terrified already.
All right, well, if you'd like to take a closer look at the decks we showcased today, the links to each deck on Moxfield will be found in the doodly-doo below. Stay tuned for some live streamed gameplay of these decks in the near future, and an eventual edit of at least one of those games.
And again, if you liked what you saw today, once again, give the video a like, comment below on just how disgusting Mill is, or perhaps you think you've got the perfect card that we've missed, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions. Also, if you'd like to see this channel grow and thrive, consider joining our Patreon. See you next time.